The palace has always thrived on whispers. For centuries, those whispers have had the power to change lives, topple reputations, and shape the course of nations. But sometimes, a single careless remark behind closed doors can ripple outward with a force no one anticipated. Imagine the weight of being born into a family where every word is scrutinized, where identity is inherited rather than chosen, and where history itself seems to hang over your shoulders. Now imagine a child, no older than 8, being branded in a way that could shape the way the world sees her for decades to come. That is the story of Princess Charlotte, the young daughter of Prince William and Kate Middleton, and the shocking insult that shook the monarchy to its core. It was meant to be a private aside, the sort of snide comment one makes in confidence, never expecting it to leak into the world beyond. Camilla, now queen consort, had allegedly compared young Charlotte to her uncle, Prince Harry, calling her the spare of the spare. At first, the words sound almost trivial, an unkind joke between adults who should know better. But in the monarchy, nothing is trivial. In a family where every title, every gesture, and every role has meaning, calling a child a spare is not just an insult. It is an act that cuts at the very identity of who they are, at the dignity of their place in the line of succession, and at the tender heart of a little girl too young to even defend herself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The term spare is steeped in royal history. It isn't just a casual nickname. It is a label that has defined entire lives. In every generation, there has been the heir, the one who is destined to inherit the throne, and the spare, the one born to serve as backup, forever in the shadow. King George VI, the reluctant monarch, only became king because his brother Edward VIII abdicated. Prince Andrew, always cast as the second to Charles, lived with that shadow. And more recently, the world has watched the saga of Prince William and Prince Harry play out, with Harry's memoir laying bare the pain of being branded as the spare. For Camilla, a woman who has lived her life fighting for acceptance within the monarchy, to use that same poisonous word against Charlotte was more than careless. It was cruel. Why does it matter? Because Charlotte is not just any child. She is the second-born of Prince William, the future King of England, and she already carries herself with a grace and poise that has captivated the public. From her spirited waves at Trooping the Color to her dignified composure during her great-grandmother Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, Charlotte has shown a maturity far beyond her years. She is loved, she is admired, and for many, she represents hope for the monarchy's future. To demean her as just another spare was not only insulting to her, but also to the vision of what the monarchy could be in the hands of its next generation. But perhaps the most shocking part of this story is not simply the insult itself, it is what happened after. Because in that one remark, Camilla not only wounded Charlotte, but also tested the patience of King Charles. Charles has always been a complicated figure, a man torn between tradition and modernity, between duty and emotion. For decades, he has weathered storms of scandal, criticism, and public scrutiny. He endured the shadow of Diana, the anger of the public over his affair with Camilla, and the relentless pressure of waiting longer than any heir in history to ascend the throne. But if there is one thing Charles has always clung to, it is the idea of family legacy. His children and grandchildren are not just loved ones. They are the monarchy's future. And when Camilla insulted Charlotte, she crossed a line that even Charles could not ignore. The story of this fallout is not just about one remark. It is about loyalty, power, and the fragile balance that holds the royal family together. It is about the deep scars left by the concept of the spare, scars that Harry himself laid bare when he said he was treated as expendable, less valuable than his brother. It is about how those scars continue to echo through the generations, shaping the way the family interacts with each other and with the world. And it is about how Charles, now king, was forced to make a choice, defend his wife, or protect the dignity of his granddaughter. What makes this story so compelling is that it feels like history repeating itself. Haven't we seen this pattern before? A royal child diminished, dismissed, or ignored, only for those wounds to fester until they explode into public crises? From Diana's battles with the crown to Harry's estrangement, the The monarchy has always struggled to balance the humanity of its members with the rigidity of its system. And yet, here we are again, a child too young to understand the weight of an insult, caught in the middle of a power struggle far bigger than herself. The remark also raises larger questions about Camilla's place within the monarchy. For years, she has worked to rehabilitate her image, transforming from the other woman into queen consort. It was a remarkable turnaround, one that seemed almost impossible in the wake of Diana's tragic death and the decades of bitterness that followed. Yet with one comment, she reignited old suspicions, reminding the world why so many had doubted her in the first place. Was this the mask slipping? Was this the real Camilla, resentful of the new generation's popularity, insecure about her own role, lashing out in the only way she knew how? Or was it simply an offhand remark, blown out of proportion by a hungry press and a public eager for scandal? As the story unfolded, the palace found itself in crisis management mode. Whispers spread that Charles had taken decisive action, stripping Camilla of certain powers and distancing her from key decisions. It was a rare and dramatic assertion of authority, the kind of move Charles had long been reluctant to make in personal matters. For him, this was more than just about silencing gossip. It was about sending a clear message. The future of the monarchy lies with William, Kate, and their children, and no one, not even his wife, would be allowed to undermine that. This scandal struck a chord with the public because it felt raw, human, and familiar. Who hasn't seen a child mocked by an adult who should know better? Who hasn't felt the sting of being underestimated, diminished, or told they don't matter? In Charlotte's case, the insult was magnified by her royal status, but at its core, it was a reminder that even the most privileged families are not immune to cruelty and dysfunction. And perhaps that is why people reacted so strongly, because beneath the crowns, the palaces, and the pageantry, this was a story about a grandmother figure saying something cruel to a child, and a grandfather deciding enough was enough. The introduction to this story sets the stage for a journey filled with tension, heartbreak, and revelation. It asks us to consider the power of words, the fragility of reputation, and the eternal struggle within the monarchy between tradition and change. It teases a story of downfall and retribution, of innocence clashing with arrogance, and of a king forced to choose sides in a battle that should never have existed in the first place. As we move deeper into this tale, we will uncover the layers of history, rivalry, and emotion that led to this moment, and we will see how a single insult ignited a chain reaction that may alter the monarchy's future forever. This is not just a story about Camilla or Charlotte. It is a story about legacy, identity, and the dangers of underestimating the quiet strength of those dismissed as spares. And by the time we reach the end, the question will linger. Was this the beginning of Camilla's undoing, or simply another chapter in the monarchy's long history of scandal and survival? It began in the stillness of a palace room, the kind of quiet that lingers after an official event when the grand corridors of Buckingham are filled only with the shuffle of attendants and the soft clink of glasses. Conversations, hushed and careful, floated from one corner to another. It was in such a moment, so ordinary it might have been forgotten, that Camilla let slip the words that would haunt her and change the way she was viewed within the royal family. The whisper was not intended for the world, not even for the ears of most of those present. It was a private barb, a small cruelty meant to be shared among a circle of confidants. But whispers have a way of finding their way to daylight, especially in the monarchy, where nothing stays hidden for long. The insult was delivered almost casually, with a tone that carried the sting of both superiority and disdain. Referring to Princess Charlotte as the spare of the spare, Camilla drew a line directly from William's younger brother, Harry, to his daughter. In those few words, she did more than insult a child. She summoned a history of pain and resentment tied to that very word. Those listening that day reportedly froze, their eyes darting as if to confirm they had heard correctly. Some lowered their gaze, unwilling to be drawn into the dangerous implications of what had been said. Others tucked the memory away, knowing that in a court where loyalty is currency, repeating the wrong words to the right person could change everything. The gravity of the remark becomes clear only when one considers the cultural weight of the term spare. To the outside world, it might sound like a throwaway insult, a cruel nickname. But within the royal family, it carries generations of baggage. A spare is the child who exists only in case the heir falters. It is a life defined not by destiny, but by contingency. Every royal who has carried that label has struggled with its consequences. Prince Andrew, though once popular, was overshadowed by his elder brother Charles and relegated to a secondary role that became increasingly uncomfortable as scandal consumed his later life. Princess Margaret, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, spent her years battling the expectations placed upon her as the spare, indulging in rebellion and heartbreak that her sister could never allow herself. And most recently, Harry's tell-all account in his book revealed the bitterness and sorrow that grew out of a childhood spent knowing he was the backup, the expendable one. That history made Camilla's words more than idle chatter. They carried an almost venomous reminder of what the monarchy has so often done wrong. It diminished the humanity of its own children. Charlotte, though too young to know the full implication, was thrust into this legacy with no defense of her own. To dismiss her as just another spare was to deny her individuality, her spirit, and the possibility of her unique contribution to the family and the nation. It was a reminder that even in an era where the monarchy seeks to modernize, old patterns of cruelty persist. The whisper itself may have been short, but the ripples it caused began immediately. Within the walls of the palace, news travels faster than any official channel could control. A servant mentions it to another, a private secretary finds it worthy of note, and soon the comment had reached ears it was never meant to touch. There is no definitive account of how King Charles first heard the words, but one can imagine the moment. A trusted aide leaning in discreetly, hesitant but compelled by duty to repeat what had been said. The king, who has endured decades of his own humiliation and harsh judgment, would have felt the weight of it instantly. For a man who had seen his younger son torn apart by the same label, the insult against Charlotte must have struck deep. It was not just Charles who reacted. William and Kate, fiercely protective of their children, were outraged. For them, this was not merely a matter of royal politics, but a personal wound. To hear their daughter mocked by someone so close to the throne, by a woman who should have been a grandmotherly figure of support, was intolerable. The private fury in their household was said to be immense. William, who had watched his brother's struggles and understood better than anyone the curse of being the spare, could not bear the thought of his daughter being subjected to the same dismissive treatment. Kate, known for her composure, was reportedly shaken in a way rarely seen, her maternal instincts clashing with the knowledge that palace politics would make confronting Camilla a delicate, if not dangerous, task. The irony was stark. Camilla, who had once been cast as the outsider, mocked and despised by both the public and the press, had spent years rehabilitating her image. She knew what it was to be treated as lesser, to be whispered about, to be considered unworthy. Yet here she was, perpetuating that same cruelty onto a child. It was a misstep not only in judgment but in empathy, and it revealed more about her insecurities than about Charlotte's place in the world. Perhaps it was jealousy of Charlotte's effortless popularity with the public, or perhaps it was an attempt to assert authority in a family where her position, though official, still feels precarious. Whatever the reason, the words once spoken could not be taken back. What gives this moment its dramatic power is that it began as a whisper, soft, private, almost invisible, and yet it carried the force of a shout once it left Camilla's lips. It speaks to the nature of power in the monarchy, where appearances matter as much as truth, and where a single careless phrase can become the seed of scandal. That day, Charlotte was not in the room. She may not have even been aware of the conversation, and yet she became the center of a storm that would soon reach every corner of the kingdom. The true weight of the whisper lies in what followed. As it spread, it became less a comment and more a symbol. It stood for the monarchy's failure to protect its own children from the harshness of its traditions. It symbolized the cruelty of treating individuals as placeholders rather than people. And it placed Camilla in a position she could not easily escape. Cast as the woman who had mocked the king's granddaughter, whose tongue had revealed a streak of malice that no amount of public charity work could mask. In that moment, she transformed from rehabilitated queen consort back into the figure the public once distrusted, a reminder of the darker side of palace life. In the world of the monarchy, whispers are never truly private. They echo down gilded halls, carried by those who live and work in their shadows, and eventually they find their way into the light. Camilla's remark about Charlotte was no exception. Though uttered quietly, it reverberated with the force of history, of pain, and of betrayal. It was the whisper that shook the palace, not because of its volume, but because of its meaning, and because it revealed a truth that those who heard it could not ignore. Even within a family bound by tradition, power, and image, cruelty has a way of slipping through the cracks, leaving wounds that may never fully heal. This was the moment the scandal began, the spark that would ignite a chain of events leading to confrontation, retribution, and a reshaping of power within the monarchy itself. What began as a whisper would soon become a roar, echoing not only through the halls of Buckingham Palace, but across the entire kingdom, forcing Charles, William, Kate, and even the public to reckon with what it meant for the monarchy's future. The word itself seems so simple, almost harmless when said aloud. Spare. A word that in everyday language might refer to an extra tire in the trunk, an additional coin in the pocket, or a moment of time left unused. But within the walls of monarchy, that word is heavy with meaning, history, and pain. To be called the spare in a royal family is to be branded from birth with a role you never asked for. You are defined not by what you are, but by what you are not. You are not the heir, not the chosen one, not the central figure around whom the entire institution revolves. You exist in the shadow of someone else's destiny, forever cast as the backup plan, the insurance policy. That is the cruel power of the term spare, and it explains why Camilla's remark about Princess Charlotte carried such destructive weight. The history of monarchy is littered with examples of the heir and the spare, a dynamic that has shaped families, fractured relationships, and in some cases, altered the course of nations. Consider the abdication crisis of 1936, when King Edward VIII gave up the throne for the woman he loved. In that moment, it was his brother, George VI, the spare, who was forced to step into a role he never wanted. His entire life had been defined by his elder brother's primacy, and he had been permitted weaknesses that were suddenly unacceptable once the crown was placed on his head. History remembers George VI as the reluctant king who found courage under fire, but his reign was only made necessary by the very existence of that label, spare. Without it, he might have lived a quieter life, free from the crushing responsibility that nearly broke him. The same story played out in subtler ways with Princess Margaret, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II. Margaret was glamorous, rebellious, passionate, and creative, traits that flourished precisely because she was not destined to be queen. Yet the label of spare was both her freedom and her curse. Her love life was policed, her choices scrutinized, all because of the monarchy's fear that the spare might threaten the stability of the heir. Her relationship with Group Captain Peter Townsend became the scandal of its time, and her eventual loneliness was the price of being forever defined by what she was not. Margaret lived her life in Elizabeth's shadow, both envying and pitying her sister. That is the strange paradox of being the spare, envied for your freedom, pitted for your irrelevance, and often destroyed by the tension between the two. In our own time, the story has been told most vividly by Prince Harry. His memoir gave a raw and painful account of what it meant to grow up as the second son, always conscious that his role was to support his brother's destiny rather than carve out his own. He wrote about being treated as expendable, about being used as a body double in medical procedures, about being reminded that his life had value only in relation to William's. For Harry, the word spare was not just a label. It was an identity imposed upon him before he could even speak. And though his story is uniquely royal, it resonated with millions because it touched on something universal: the pain of being second best, of being overshadowed, of being seen as less than. This is the context that makes Camilla's words so sharp. To call Charlotte the spare of the spare was not only to dismiss her personally, but to chain her to a history of pain and resentment that has haunted the monarchy for generations. Charlotte is not just the second-born child of William. She is the granddaughter of a king, the great-granddaughter of a queen, and a child already admired by the public for her poise and spirit. Yet with that one remark, Camilla sought to diminish her into nothing more than a placeholder, a backup to the backup. It was a reminder of the cruelty with which the monarchy has often treated those who fall outside the singular spotlight of inheritance. What makes the label so damaging is that it strips away individuality. The heir is celebrated for their uniqueness, groomed for their destiny, prepared from birth to lead. The spare, by contrast, is defined entirely in negative space. Not the heir, not the chosen one. It creates a life where your existence is justified only by the possibility of tragedy befalling someone else. And when that tragedy never comes, as is usually the case, you are left to spend your life searching for meaning outside the structure that defined you. Some, like George VI, find purpose in unexpected ways. Others, like Margaret and Harry, struggle against the limitations and expectations, rebelling in ways that scandalize the institution. The title of spare becomes a prison, one that is gilded but suffocating all the same. There is also a cruel double standard at play. The heir's mistakes are often forgiven as the growing pains of a future ruler, while the spare's mistakes are magnified as proof of their inferiority. Margaret was castigated for her love affairs, while Elizabeth's emotional reserve was praised as duty. Harry's struggles were branded as weakness, while William's were interpreted as the burden of leadership. The heir benefits from the cushion of destiny, while the spare lives in constant comparison, every flaw amplified. To cast Charlotte into that role so publicly, even in the form of a whisper, was to mark her as destined for a lifetime of diminished expectations. And yet, history also shows us that spares have often been the most fascinating figures in the monarchy. They are the ones free enough to challenge conventions, to embrace art, romance, and individuality in ways the heir never could. Margaret's flair made her a style icon. Harry's candor has made him a voice for mental health and veteran issues. Even George VI, thrust unwillingly into power, found within himself a resilience that inspired a nation during the darkest days of war. The irony is that the spares, though mocked and diminished, often carry qualities that endear them to the public in ways the heirs cannot. Perhaps that is why Charlotte, even at her young age, has already captured so many hearts. She is unafraid to show her personality, whether shushing her brothers at public events or offering a radiant smile that feels refreshingly human amid the pomp of royal ceremonies. Camilla's comment, then, was not only cruel but short-sighted. It ignored the possibility that Charlotte might grow into a figure who defines her own importance, not in spite of being the spare, but because of it. It overlooked the lessons of history, the evidence that those dismissed as backups often become the very symbols of resilience and humanity that the monarchy most needs. In that sense, the remark was not just an insult to Charlotte, but a failure to understand the deeper meaning of her place in the royal story. Why does this matter to the public? Because the monarchy, for all its pomp, is a mirror of human experience. Families everywhere know the pain of favoritism, the struggles of siblings cast into roles they did not choose. To see that dynamic play out in the royal family makes it both relatable and tragic. Charlotte's story, shaped so early by this insult, becomes a reminder of how labels can define and damage children long before they understand their implications. It invites us to ask, what kind of monarchy will this next generation inherit? One that repeats the cruelties of the past, or one that learns to value each child for who they are, not for the order in which they were born? The weight of the word spare cannot be overstated. It has shaped monarchs, destroyed lives, and fueled scandals that still echo today. Camilla's choice to hurl that label at Charlotte was not just a moment of unkindness. It was a betrayal of the lessons the monarchy should have already learned. In doing so, she reignited a debate about the role of spares in the royal family, about the scars that come from being dismissed as second best, and about whether the institution can ever escape its history of cruel hierarchies. For Charlotte, the journey is only beginning. But for those who heard the remark, it was a chilling reminder that the mistakes of the past are never far from repeating themselves. This was why the insult was not forgotten, why it spread through the palace like a spark on dry tinder, and why King Charles, who has lived through the pain of family rivalry and public humiliation, could not afford to let it pass. For him, the word was more than an insult to a granddaughter. It was a wound reopened, a ghost from the past, a warning of what might happen if he allowed the monarchy to continue defining its children by such a cruel measure. and it was the moment that set him on a path to act. Camilla's journey to becoming queen consort is one of the most unusual, controversial, and divisive sagas in modern royal history. To understand why her remark about Princess Charlotte carried such weight, one must first understand the complexity of her own story, how she went from being one of the most vilified women in Britain to holding the title of queen. It is a story of survival, reinvention, and ruthless determination, but also one shadowed by insecurity and resentment. And it is those insecurities that may well have slipped through the cracks when she whispered that Charlotte was just another spare. Camilla Shand was born into privilege but not into royalty. Her family moved in upper-class circles, and from an early age she understood the codes of Britain's elite: the riding, the hunting, the house parties where the aristocracy mingled. She was not the kind of woman the monarchy envisioned as a future queen. She was earthy, unpretentious, and fond of a cigarette and a laugh. Yet it was those very qualities that drew Charles to her when they first met in the early 1970s. Unlike the young debutantes presented to him by courtiers, Camilla was relaxed, confident, and unimpressed by the trappings of royalty. In her, Charles found companionship and warmth, something that stood in sharp contrast to the formality of his world. But timing was cruel. Charles was pressured into marrying someone deemed more suitable. Young, aristocratic, virginal, and photogenic, Diana Spencer became his bride, and history recorded the rest. The fairy tale wedding that crumbled into betrayal, bitterness, and tragedy. Through it all, Camilla remained in Charles's life. Their affair became one of the most infamous scandals of the 20th century. When Diana famously declared in her BBC interview that there were 3 of us in this marriage, she cemented Camilla's image as the interloper, the woman who had destroyed the fairy tale. The British public turned on Camilla with venom, casting her as the villain. She was mocked in the press, booed in the streets, and demonized as the anti-Diana. It is hard to overstate the scale of the public hatred she endured. For years, Camilla was seen as unelectable, untouchable, the woman who could never be queen. When Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, nearly a decade after Diana's death, Buckingham Palace went out of its way to reassure the public that she would not be styled queen consort when Charles became king, but rather princess consort, a softer title meant to soothe lingering resentment. The message was clear: Camilla might be Charles's wife, but she would never be Diana's equal in the eyes of the people. And yet, over the years, she worked to rehabilitate her image. Slowly, through carefully chosen charity work, quiet appearances, and a conscious effort to avoid the limelight, Camilla began to soften public opinion. She became patron of causes related to literacy, osteoporosis awareness, and domestic violence, issues that resonated with ordinary people and reframed her as someone more than a tabloid caricature. The media, which once delighted in mocking her, began to shift its tone. Photographs showed her smiling alongside Charles, comfortable and affectionate in a way that Diana and Charles never were. Her down-to-earth manner, once criticized, was rebranded as refreshing. Over time, Camilla was transformed in the public imagination from the other woman into a grandmotherly figure, pragmatic and supportive. But this rehabilitation never erased the shadows of her past. To many, she remained the woman who had supplanted Diana, who had stepped into a role that should never have been hers. And for Camilla herself, the knowledge that she was once despised, that she had clawed her way back from the brink of public rejection, must have lingered. Insecure people often mask their fears with cruelty. It is not difficult to imagine that behind her smile and charitable work, Camilla still harbored a defensiveness, a need to assert herself within a family where her place was won not by birthright, but by persistence. That is what makes her remark about Charlotte so telling. In that whisper, one sees the flash of the old Camilla, sharp-tongued, dismissive, quick to cut others down to elevate herself. Why would she do it? Perhaps it was jealousy. Charlotte, even at her young age, commands more affection from the public than Camilla ever has. Her confident little waves, her sense of composure at official events, her resemblance to both Diana and the Queen, these have made her a favorite among royal watchers. Camilla, by contrast, has always had to fight for approval, and even now, as queen consort, she knows she will never be as beloved as a child born of William and Kate. It is possible the remark was a petty swipe, a way to remind herself and those around her that in the rigid hierarchy of the monarchy, Charlotte was not the heir, just a backup. Camilla's role as queen consort also carries unique pressures. Unlike queens of the past, she cannot rely on public reverence for her title alone. She lacks the history, the lineage, and the aura of someone like Queen Elizabeth II. She must constantly prove her worth, walking a tightrope between visibility and restraint. Too much presence, and she risks overshadowing Charles. Too little, and she appears irrelevant. In that delicate balancing act, slips are inevitable. And when the slip comes in the form of an insult toward a child as cherished as Charlotte, the consequences are explosive. There is also the matter of Camilla's relationship with William and Harry. Though William has been outwardly cordial, the shadow of Diana looms large. It is no secret that William has struggled with Camilla's presence, tolerating her more out of duty than affection. Kate, too, has always maintained a respectful distance, presenting unity in public while keeping Camilla at arm's length in private. For Harry, the situation has been even more fraught. In his memoir, he openly criticized Camilla, accusing her of leaking stories to the press to rehabilitate her own image at the expense of others. He described her as dangerous, someone willing to sacrifice anyone to secure her place. In that context, Camilla's remark about Charlotte appears not as an isolated slip, but as part of a pattern, a glimpse into the calculating, insecure woman her critics have always accused her of being. Her role as queen consort is also complicated by the fact that she shares the throne with Charles during a time of transition. The monarchy is fragile, its future uncertain, and public trust in the institution is no longer a given. Charles depends on William, Kate, and their children to secure that future. In many ways, the monarchy's survival rests less on Charles and Camilla than on the young family that represents continuity and modernity. That reality places Camilla in a difficult position. She holds the title of queen, but she knows her power is limited, temporary, and ultimately overshadowed by the generations that come after her. That knowledge may well breed resentment, particularly toward the children who embody the future she does not. Camilla's journey to becoming queen consort is therefore not just a story of redemption. It is a story of constant negotiation with the public, with the press, with the family, and with herself. She is a woman who has clawed her way into acceptance, but who has never escaped the whispers that follow her. And when she let slip her own whisper about Charlotte, it was those old demons resurfacing, the insecurities and cruelties of a woman who has never been fully at peace with her place. This is why her remark cannot be dismissed as harmless gossip. It was not just about Charlotte. It was about Camilla herself, about the contradictions of her life, about the fragile balance she has always struggled to maintain. It was the crack in the carefully constructed image she has built, a reminder that behind the polished exterior still lurks the sharp-edged figure the world once despised. And in a monarchy where image is everything, that crack was enough to threaten the foundations of her power. Camilla's complex role as queen consort is defined by survival, but survival built on shaky ground is never stable. Her insult to Charlotte revealed not only her own insecurities, but also the precariousness of her position. It was a misstep that exposed the truth. Camilla may wear the crown, but acceptance is borrowed, not earned. And with one cruel remark, she reminded the world of why so many had doubted her in the first place. Charlotte's growing importance within the royal family is one of the most fascinating and underestimated developments in the monarchy's modern history. From the moment of her birth, she has captured the imagination of the public in a way that very few royal children have. She is not the heir, nor the first in line to inherit the throne, but she embodies something that has made her presence impossible to ignore, an unmistakable blend of charisma, dignity, and spirit that makes people see her not just as a supporting figure, but as someone with a destiny all her own. To understand why Camilla's insult struck such a nerve, one must first understand just how significant Charlotte has already become, despite her young age. Charlotte Elizabeth Diana was born in May 2015, and her very name signaled her importance. Charles, Elizabeth, and Diana, three names woven into royal history, three legacies carried forward in a single child. From the start, She was placed within a web of expectations and symbolism. The public adored her arrival, celebrating not just the continuation of the royal line, but also the promise of a new kind of princess, one raised in an era of shifting traditions and evolving roles for women. When she was first photographed in her mother's arms outside the Lindo wing, wrapped in a delicate white blanket, the image radiated innocence, continuity, and hope. Few could have guessed how quickly she would develop a presence that stood out even within a family dominated by her brother George's position as heir. As she grew, Charlotte began to reveal a personality that intrigued the public. She was spirited, lively, unafraid to show her emotions in public, whether it was sticking out her tongue at photographers or gently reminding her brothers to behave during ceremonies. There is something undeniably relatable about her, a balance between cheeky charm and composure that makes her feel both royal and down-to-earth. Unlike George, who often carries the weight of expectation on his young shoulders, Charlotte seems freer, more natural, able to command attention without appearing burdened by her future. That difference has not gone unnoticed by the media or the public, who often comment on how comfortable she appears in her role. Charlotte's growing importance is also reflected in her place within the line of succession. She was the first royal child not to be pushed down the line by the birth of a younger brother. Thanks to changes in succession laws, gender no longer determined order, and Charlotte retained her position as fourth in line to the throne after George, regardless of Louis's arrival. This made her a symbol of modernity within the monarchy, a living example of reform that ensured daughters were treated equally to sons. In this way, Charlotte is more than just William and Kate's daughter. She is part of a broader story about how the monarchy adapts to contemporary values, a story that gives her significance far beyond her age. Her growing importance has been seen most vividly in moments of national ceremony. During Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, Charlotte was praised for her composure. Dressed in black, with a small horseshoe brooch pinned to her coat, a tribute to her great-grandmother. She carried herself with remarkable dignity. At an age where most children would have fidgeted, cried, or withdrawn from the overwhelming gravity of the occasion, Charlotte stood solemn and attentive, her presence a reminder that even the youngest members of the royal family are participants in history. The images of her walking beside George, both children guided gently by their mother, struck the world with their poignancy. Many remarked that Charlotte seemed to understand the gravity of the moment more deeply than one might expect of a child, as though she was instinctively aware of the role she was playing. This ability to embody both childhood innocence and royal gravitas has made Charlotte a figure of fascination. She appears confident in public, sometimes even guiding George or Louis with a glance or a quiet word, as though she has already assumed the role of steadying presence among her siblings. In those moments, one sees echoes of her great-aunt Princess and who became a stalwart support for her mother, the Queen. Some royal watchers even suggest that Charlotte may one day play a similar role for George, offering him the unwavering loyalty and balance that the monarchy so desperately needs from its secondary figures. The comparison is not without reason, and has long been praised for her work ethic, her straightforwardness, and her refusal to court unnecessary drama. Charlotte, even at her young age, seems to possess that same mixture of strength and authenticity. Her growing popularity has also been amplified by the modern media landscape. Photographs and videos of Charlotte often go viral, with fans praising her natural confidence and sense of humor. She has become something of a star in her own right, with commentators remarking on her resemblance to both Diana and Elizabeth. In her expressions, some see Diana's spark. In her posture, Elizabeth's poise. This combination of traits connects her to two of the most iconic women in modern royal history, and that connection only deepens the public's fascination. For a monarchy so reliant on symbolism and continuity, Charlotte's very existence serves as a bridge between past, present, and future. There is also the matter of how William and Kate are raising her. Unlike previous generations of royals, who grew up in rigid formality, Charlotte and her brothers are being raised with a careful balance of tradition and normalcy. They attend school, they play sports, they are given as much privacy as possible. Yet they are also prepared for the roles they will inevitably assume. Charlotte has been taught how to behave in public, how to interact with dignitaries, and how to carry herself with dignity. It is a delicate balance, but one that has so far given her the grounding to flourish. This upbringing may be one of the reasons she appears so comfortable in her skin, already aware of who she is without being overwhelmed by it. In many ways, Charlotte represents the future the monarchy hopes to project: modern, relatable, yet steeped in tradition. She is proof that the institution can adapt, that it can raise daughters and sons with equal significance, that it can connect with the public not through rigid hierarchy, but through genuine affection. It is this promise that makes Camilla's remark all the more damaging. To dismiss Charlotte as just another spare was not only cruel, but blind to the role she is already playing in shaping the monarchy's image. It ignored her individuality, her spirit, her potential to become one of the defining figures of her generation. What Camilla perhaps underestimated is the way the public has already embraced Charlotte. People see her not as secondary, but as essential. They admire her confidence, her spark, her resemblance to beloved figures of the past. They already view her as someone special, someone destined to make her mark regardless of titles or succession. That is why the insult struck such a chord. It clashed so violently with the image of Charlotte that people hold in their hearts. It felt like an attempt to drag her down, to confine her to a role she has already begun to transcend. Charlotte's growing importance cannot be overstated. She is more than just the daughter of a future king. She is a symbol of modern monarchy, a child who carries within her the legacies of Elizabeth, Diana, and the promise of a new generation. She is proof that the monarchy's future may rest not just on the shoulders of heirs, but also on the strength and individuality of those once dismissed as spares. In her, the public sees resilience, charm, and dignity. And it is precisely because of this that Camilla's words cut so deep. They were not just an insult to a child. They were an insult to the promise of what Charlotte represents, and to the hope that the monarchy, at last, can learn from its past and treat every member with the respect they deserve. The moment King Charles first heard of Camilla's remark about Princess Charlotte, it was like a wound reopening from deep within his past. For a man who had spent decades trying to balance the demands of duty with the struggles of family, the idea that his wife had so carelessly insulted his granddaughter was intolerable. To understand his reaction, we must place ourselves inside his world, a world shaped by relentless criticism, complicated personal relationships, and the painful legacy of favoritism and neglect that has defined so much of the royal family's history. Charles was not simply a king hearing gossip. He was a father and a grandfather confronted with words that touched a raw nerve, words that echoed a history he had hoped to leave behind. Imagine the scene. The information would not have been delivered in public, nor in anger, but discreetly, perhaps by an aide whose job it was to ensure the king was aware of matters within the family. Such things are whispered in hallways, behind closed doors, cautiously phrased so as not to overstep. Yet the content of the whisper carried enough weight to shake Charles profoundly. Camilla, the woman he had stood by through scandal and public hatred, the woman he had elevated to the role of queen consort despite enormous controversy, had allegedly dismissed his granddaughter as the spare of the spare. The words struck him like a blade, not only because of their cruelty toward Charlotte, but because of what they revealed about the lingering cracks within his own family. Charles has always been a man acutely aware of history. He grew up in the shadow of a mother who embodied the crown with near perfection, and he endured a childhood marked more by discipline than by affection. As a boy, he was sent to Gordonstown, a school known for its harshness, where he felt isolated and misunderstood. Throughout his life, he struggled with a sense of inadequacy, never fully at ease with the expectations placed upon him. His marriage to Diana brought him both heirs and decades of turmoil. His affair with Camilla cast him as a villain in the eyes of millions, and his long wait for the throne made him the most scrutinized heir in history. Every step of the way, he carried the scars of criticism and the desperate need for approval. That is why the insult about Charlotte cut so deeply. He knew better than most the pain of being diminished, the sting of being judged unfairly. He had watched Harry's life spiral in large part because of the label of spare, a label Harry came to believe defined his entire existence. In Harry's words and accusations, Charles had been forced to confront his own failings as a father, accused of neglect, favoritism, and coldness. And now, to hear that his wife had mocked Charlotte with the same language, linking her to the very dynamic that had driven Harry away, must have filled him with a sense of dread. It was as though the ghosts of the past had returned, threatening to repeat themselves with a new generation. There was also the matter of loyalty. For Charles, family loyalty is not simply personal. It is bound up with the survival of the monarchy itself. He knows that William, Kate, George, Charlotte, and Louis represent the future. Public affection for them is strong, and their image as a stable, loving family is the monarchy's greatest asset. To insult Charlotte was, in a sense, to insult that entire vision of the future. It was to undermine the very thing that sustains the monarchy's relevance in the modern world. Charles could not ignore that. To do so would risk not only alienating William and Kate, but also damaging the institution he has sworn to protect. His emotional response would have been complex. Anger, yes, but also disappointment and sorrow. Anger at Camilla for her cruelty, disappointment in himself for not anticipating such a slip, and sorrow at the realization that once again, his family was becoming entangled in the destructive patterns of the past. He may have thought of Diana, the woman whose memory still lingers over every part of his reign, and wondered how she would have reacted to her granddaughter being dismissed so cruelly. He may have thought of Harry, of the estrangement that still haunts him, and feared that Charlotte might one day grow up to feel similarly unvalued. Behind palace walls, his confrontation with Camilla would not have been dramatic in the theatrical sense, but it would have been heavy with emotion. Charles is not a man prone to shouting matches. His style is more restrained, but no less forceful. He would have spoken quietly, perhaps even with a tremor in his voice, making clear that the insult was unacceptable. For Camilla, who has long relied on Charles's protection and support, this moment would have been deeply unsettling. She has always known that her position was controversial, that it depended on Charles's steadfastness in the face of public skepticism. To feel that his loyalty was shaken, even momentarily, would have rattled her profoundly. The wider family's reaction also mattered. William, as a father, would have pressed the issue. Protective of Charlotte, he would have made clear to his father that this could not be brushed aside. Kate, too, would have insisted that the insult be addressed, not just for Charlotte's sake, but for the message it sent to the children as they grew older. Both of them know how deeply words can wound, how labels applied in childhood can linger for decades. Their pressure on Charles to take action would have added to his burden, forcing him to weigh loyalty to his wife against his responsibility to his son and grandchildren. It was at this moment that Charles made his choice. He would defend Charlotte. He would protect his son's family. He would not allow Camilla's remark to pass unchallenged. For a man who has often been accused of indecisiveness, this was a rare moment of clarity. He could not change the past, could not undo the pain that Diana endured or the bitterness that drove Harry away, but he could draw a line here. He could make clear that Charlotte mattered, that no child of William and Kate would ever be diminished or dismissed in the way Harry had felt himself to be. This was not just about family, it was about legacy. The personal stakes for Charles were enormous. He has spent his reign trying to modernize the monarchy, to make it more transparent, compassionate, and relevant. He has spoken often about the importance of harmony within the family, knowing that public unity is essential to maintaining the crown's authority. To have his own wife disrupt that unity with a careless insult threatened to undo much of what he had worked for. By addressing it, by taking action against Camilla, he was protecting not only Charlotte but the fragile image of stability that sustains the monarchy in a skeptical age. The image of Charles upon hearing the insult is a striking one. Alone, perhaps seated in one of the palace's gilded rooms, the words echoing in his mind. His face lined not just with age but with the burdens of a lifetime spent under scrutiny. A man who has made mistakes, who has been forgiven and condemned in equal measure, now confronted with yet another test of his resolve. And in that moment, he decides. The insult will not stand. Charlotte will be defended. The monarchy's future will not be built on the same wounds that scarred its past. This was the turning point. What began as a whisper in the corridors of Buckingham Palace had reached the ears of the king, and the king was not prepared to ignore it. The decision he made in response would reverberate throughout the family, altering the dynamics of his marriage, his relationship with his children, and his image in the eyes of the public. It was the moment Charles heard the insult, and it was the moment he decided to act. For William and Kate, the remark about Charlotte was not just another palace whisper to be endured or brushed aside. It was personal, it was wounding, and it struck directly at the core of what they had promised each other from the moment they began raising their children. That George, Charlotte, and Louis would be protected as much as possible from the cruelties of the world. And now, the cruelty had not come from tabloids, distant relatives, or public criticism, but from inside their own family. From the woman who had become queen consort, the stepmother to William, and the grandmother-in-law to their children. This was a line crossed, and their reaction would prove to be one of the most decisive responses to palace tension in years. William has always been protective of his children, carrying with him the scars of his own childhood. He remembers the way his mother, Diana, was hounded by the press, the way her emotions spilled out under the pressure of being married to a man who loved someone else, and the way she tried to shield him and Harry from the glare of cameras, even as the palace machinery often failed her. For William, those years created a vow. His children would not suffer as he and his brother did. Every decision he and Kate have made, the choice of schools, the deliberate attempts to create as normal a home life as possible, the carefully managed appearances, has been shaped by that vow. To hear that Camilla, of all people, had called Charlotte the spare of the spare, was to feel history attempting to repeat itself. It was the very thing he had sworn would not happen, his child being defined by her position in the line of succession rather than by her character, her talents, or her worth. The fury within William's private chambers must have been immense. Unlike his father, who tends to internalize emotions and deliberate slowly, William has a more fiery side, especially when it comes to his family. He has clashed with the press, challenged the palace's outdated practices, and even stormed out of meetings when he felt his family's well-being was not being prioritized. In this case, the insult to Charlotte would have ignited that fierce protective instinct. To him, this was not palace gossip. This was his daughter, his little girl, who had done nothing to deserve such words. In William's mind, it was not just an insult, it was a betrayal. Kate's reaction, though expressed differently, was no less powerful. Known for her composure and calm demeanor, Kate has long played the role of peacemaker within the family, soothing tensions and presenting a united front. But when it comes to her children, that calm exterior hardens into something unshakable. Kate's entire identity as a mother has been about nurturing her children with love, protection, and stability, giving them the safe environment she never wants them to lose. Hearing that her daughter had been reduced to a cruel label would have hit her like a dagger. In her eyes, Charlotte is not a spare, nor a symbol of hierarchy. She is her daughter, precious and unique, brimming with personality and potential. To see her child dismissed so casually by Camilla would have been intolerable. Together, William and Kate would have discussed the situation with quiet intensity. There are decisions in royal life that are rehearsed, deliberate, designed to align with palace protocol. But there are other moments when instinct takes over, when emotion trumps calculation. This was one of those moments. Their conversation likely circled around not only their anger, but the long-term implications. How could they teach their children resilience if within their own family, those children were belittled? How could they maintain unity when someone so close had shown such disregard for their daughter? And how could they ensure that this moment did not mark the beginning of the same cycle that had so damaged William's relationship with his brother? It is likely that Kate, ever the pragmatist, reminded William of the need to handle the matter carefully. A public confrontation with Camilla would have risked scandal of an even larger scale. But at the same time, silence would have been seen as weakness. They could not simply let the insult pass. William, for his part, would have been determined that his father know exactly how deeply this had affected him. Their children were not pawns to be diminished by casual cruelty. They were the future of the monarchy, the very symbols of continuity and hope that Charles depended on. If Camilla could not respect that, then she could not expect to be treated as a trusted member of their circle. There is also the emotional dimension of how William and Kate saw Charlotte's role within their family. George may be the heir, but they have always raised Charlotte and Louis with equal love and equal expectation of worth. William himself has spoken in interviews about Charlotte's spirited nature, her confidence, and the way she often keeps her brothers in line. Kate has been open about how Charlotte is a natural leader, unafraid to speak her mind. These qualities are not lost on the public, who often remark on Charlotte's poise during official events. To have Camilla dismiss all of that with the word spare was not only insulting but also blind to the qualities that make Charlotte extraordinary. For William and Kate, defending her was not simply about titles or positions in line. It was about honoring who she is as a person. Their anger also carried another layer, the shadow of Diana. The memory of their mother's pain is never far from William's mind, and the idea that Camilla, the woman most associated with Diana's heartbreak, would now target his daughter must have felt unbearably cruel. For Kate, who has often been compared to Diana in her grace and public appeal, the insult would have been doubly painful. It was as though the cycle of hurt inflicted on Diana was threatening to spill into another generation. For both of them, it was unacceptable. It is likely that William confronted his father directly, expressing his outrage and disappointment. Such conversations are not conducted with raised voices in the palace, but with a kind of cold intensity that carries even more weight. William would have made it clear that his family's dignity was not negotiable, and that Camilla's remark had crossed a boundary that could not be ignored. Kate, though less direct in her dealings with Charles, would have supported her husband's stance, reinforcing the seriousness of the matter. Together, they presented a united front, demanding that their children be protected not only from the outside world, but also from the insensitivity of those within their circle. For Charles, their reaction would have been decisive. He knew that his son's anger was justified, and that Kate's disapproval carried enormous weight. He also knew that without William and Kate's support, the monarchy's future would be imperiled. The fury of William and Kate was not something he could afford to dismiss, and it strengthened his resolve to act. Their reaction, then, was not only personal but also strategic. By voicing their anger, they ensured that the insult would not be buried, and that Camilla would face consequences for her words. The importance of William and Kate's reaction cannot be overstated. In defending their daughter, they defended the principle that every child in the monarchy deserves respect, regardless of their position in the line of succession. They drew a line that had too often been ignored in the past, insisting that the mistakes of previous generations would not be repeated. Their outrage was the voice of a new era, one that placed family above hierarchy and dignity above protocol. And in doing so, they forced the king himself to confront the reality that his wife had crossed a line that could not be forgiven. For William and Kate, this was not just about Charlotte. It was about setting the tone for the future, about proving that their children would not be diminished by the same cruel patterns that had haunted the monarchy for centuries. Their reaction was fierce, determined, and uncompromising. It was the moment they made clear that their family would be protected at all costs, and that Camilla's words, whispered in arrogance, had ignited a storm that would not pass quietly. When a whisper leaves the safety of palace walls, it rarely stays small for long. In the age of relentless media, where every raised eyebrow and overheard comment can ignite a firestorm, Camilla's remark about Princess Charlotte was destined to escape the private corridors of Buckingham Palace and reach the public stage. And when it did, the reaction was immediate, furious, and impossible to contain. The insult became more than gossip. It became a national scandal, a headline that spread from tabloids to broadsheets, from television broadcasts to social media feeds. It was no longer just about what Camilla had said in private. It was about the monarchy itself and its failure to escape its history of cruelty toward those labeled as spares. The media storm began quietly, as such things always do. At first, there were whispers in the press, carefully worded suggestions that a senior royal had made an unkind comment about a younger family member. Journalists, skilled at parsing rumors, began piecing together the story. The moment a name was attached, Camilla, the Queen consort, the coverage exploded. Headlines screamed about betrayal, cruelty, and echoes of past scandals. For a press corps that had always had a complicated relationship with Camilla, this was irresistible. She had worked for years to rehabilitate her image, but deep down, she remained a figure who could be cast as a villain with very little effort. And now she had handed them the perfect narrative. The Queen consort mocking the king's granddaughter, the daughter of the nation's beloved William and Kate. The tabloid press, in particular, seized on the phrase "spare of the spare." They splashed it across their front pages in bold letters, framing it as both an insult and a revelation of Camilla's true feelings. Commentators filled airwaves, dissecting the meaning of the term spare, reminding audiences of Harry's book and the wounds it had revealed. The connection was too clear to ignore. Harry had accused the monarchy of treating him as expendable, and now here was Camilla, using that same language to diminish Charlotte. It was as though the monarchy had learned nothing, as though the cycle of cruelty was destined to repeat itself. The coverage was merciless, painting Camilla as petty, insecure, and out of touch. Social media amplified the storm to a level that would have been unimaginable in earlier eras of royal scandal. Hashtags condemning Camilla trended worldwide. Memes comparing Charlotte's dignity at public events to Camilla's careless words flooded timelines. Influencers and commentators weighed in, some with humor, others with outrage. The digital world, quick to rally behind symbols of innocence, cast Charlotte as the wrong child and Camilla as the jealous step-grandmother who could not bear to see the spotlight shift toward a new generation. The virality of the story ensured that it could not be contained by palace press offices or managed with carefully worded statements. The narrative had escaped, and it was spreading uncontrollably. What gave the scandal its intensity was the way it tapped into deeper public feelings about the monarchy. The British public, though often tolerant of royal quirks, has little patience for cruelty toward children. Charlotte, already adored for her personality and poise, became a symbol of innocence targeted unfairly. People remembered her at the Queen's funeral, her little figure dressed in black, carrying herself with composure that touched millions. To think of that same child being dismissed as irrelevant enraged the public. It felt like a betrayal not just of Charlotte, but of the values the monarchy was supposed to embody. At a time when the institution desperately needed to project stability, compassion, and unity, Camilla's words painted a picture of pettiness and division. The media also drew connections to Diana, as they so often do in times of scandal. Commentators recalled how Diana had fought to give William and Harry a sense of normalcy and self-worth, how she had railed against the coldness of the institution. They contrasted her efforts with Camilla's apparent disregard for Charlotte's dignity. For many, the insult was another reminder of the sharp difference between Diana and Camilla, reigniting old wounds and reviving the narrative of Diana as the compassionate mother versus Camilla as the cold interloper. The press knows that invoking Diana always stirs emotion, and they leaned heavily into the comparison, ensuring that Camilla's reputation suffered even further. Palace officials scrambled to respond, but their efforts were hamstrung by the nature of the scandal. To deny the remark outright would risk being contradicted by leaks from within. To confirm it would be to admit that the Queen Consort had insulted her own granddaughter-in-law. The strategy, as so often in royal crises, was silence, but silence only fueled speculation. In the absence of official clarification, the media filled the void with commentary, analysis, and endless repetition of the phrase "spare of the spare." The palace's reluctance to address the issue head-on was interpreted as tacit acknowledgement, further damaging Camilla's image. Public opinion polls soon reflected the fallout. Camilla's already fragile popularity plummeted, while support for William, Kate, and their children surged. Charlotte, in particular, was cast as a symbol of the future, a child unfairly targeted who nevertheless carried herself with grace. The contrast between her innocence and Camilla's cruelty was irresistible to the public imagination. Some commentators even suggested that the monarchy's survival depended less on Charles and Camilla and more on the next generation, a narrative that further marginalized Camilla's position. International media joined the fray, framing the scandal as yet another example of the monarchy's internal dysfunction. American outlets drew parallels to Harry's criticisms, while European newspapers highlighted the irony of a queen consort undermining her step-granddaughter. The global reach of the story ensured that it was not just a British embarrassment, but an international spectacle. Every detail was scrutinized, every photograph of Charlotte analyzed for meaning, every appearance of Camilla interpreted as defensive or resentful. The storm was relentless, and it showed no sign of abating. For William and Kate, the media frenzy was both a burden and a vindication. They had not sought the scandal, But the public's outrage confirmed that they were right to be furious. Their defense of Charlotte was mirrored by the nation's defense of her. For Charles, the media storm was catastrophic. It threatened to overshadow his reign, to reduce his authority by portraying him as a king unable to control his own household. For Camilla, it was a nightmare. Years of careful rehabilitation undone in a matter of days, her reputation collapsing under the weight of a careless remark. The media storm did not just report on the scandal. It magnified it, cementing the insult as a defining moment of her queenship.